The road into Death Valley begins like a dare. Highway 190 stretches through nothing but wind and mirage, a ribbon of asphalt that seems to dissolve into heat before it ever reaches the horizon. On June 3, 1992, Michael and Rachel Bennett turned off that road and drove straight into the desert that would erase them for nearly 3 decades. They weren't drifters or thrill-seekers. Michael was 35, a mechanical engineer from Reno. Rachel, 33, a registered nurse. They had married only 7 months earlier. A small courthouse wedding with plastic flowers on the table and a promise that they'd take a real honeymoon once they'd both saved up vacation time. That week in June was supposed to be it, a drive through the Southwest, ending at the coast. Friends described them as opposites that somehow fit. Michael was methodical, obsessed with maps and fuel calculations. Rachel improvised, spontaneous, enough to talk him into detours for roadside diners and ghost towns. When they told their families they'd camp one night inside Death Valley, everyone laughed. "Just don't run out of gas," Rachel's sister had said. The couple left Beatty, Nevada, at 9 a.m. in their white 1989 Toyota 4Runner, a cooler full of water and film canisters in the back. Michael logged each fuel stop in his notebook. They entered the park from the east, where the land sinks below sea level and the air feels heavy even before noon. At 1:37 p.m., they stopped at Furnace Creek Visitor Center, bought 2 bottles of Gatorade, and asked about backcountry routes. The ranger on duty remembered them well because hardly anyone asked about Lippincott Mine Road in summer. He told them the truth. It wasn't really a road, more a historical trail carved into shale and sand. "You'll need 4-wheel drive and shade that doesn't exist." Michael grinned politely, took a map, and circled the route anyway. That was the last confirmed sighting. 2 days later, when neither showed up for work or returned calls, their families reported them missing. The initial assumption was car trouble. Rangers combed every major route but found nothing. No tire marks, no debris, no sign of the 4Runner. Temperatures that week topped 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Search flights ran at dawn and dusk to avoid air distortion, but the desert shimmer swallowed detail. By day 7, the official search listed them as presumed lost due to exposure. No bodies, no vehicle, no tracks. Just one postcard Rachel had mailed from Beatty that arrived after she vanished. "Heading into the valley. It's even more beautiful than I imagined. Love you. R." Years passed. Time bleached the memory into local legend, the honeymooners who vanished into the heat. In 2008, a hobbyist named Travis Reed joined a metal detecting forum that traded rumors about lost cars and plane wrecks. He read an old ranger's account of a white SUV sighted near Warm Springs Canyon weeks after the disappearance, too distant to confirm. Travis loaded coordinates into his GPS and decided to spend his vacation searching. By then, Death Valley was different. Satellite phones, drones, and detailed topographic overlays replaced guesswork. But the valley still played by its own rules. Sudden flash floods, dust devils, silence so complete it felt like a physical weight. On March 17, 2021, Travis parked near an abandoned talc mine, shouldered his detector, and began sweeping a slope littered with quartz fragments. He wasn't looking for treasure, just history. The detector squealed near a patch of sand where nothing grew. He knelt, brushed aside the crust, and saw the first glint, a thin gold ring fused to another by corrosion. The inside engraving was still legible, M&R, Forever 92. He froze. The air felt wrong, too still. He photographed the find, logged GPS 36.1607, 117.0551, and turned to hike back. And that's when he saw the second object half buried near a dry wash. A small silver camera, the kind sold in drugstores during the early 90s. The film door was sealed by melted plastic. Travis carried both items out and turned them over to park authorities. Within 48 hours, the Park Service reopened the Bennett file. The rings matched the couple's wedding registry. The camera model matched one Michael had purchased the week before their trip, but the coordinates didn't make sense. The site was 26 miles off any mapped road, across terrain that would have shredded tires. When investigators examined satellite imagery from 1992 archival data, they spotted faint parallel lines leading toward that wash, a vehicle track erased by decades of wind. On March 24th, a Ranger drone scanned the area. At 3:12 p.m., Thermal mapping caught metallic reflections under a layer of compacted sediment. Excavation began the next morning. By noon, they uncovered a section of white frame, a Toyota emblem, and then the rear door handle still locked. Inside, they found sand, a single shoe, and the crumbled remains of a road atlas folded to a page labeled Death Valley Alternate Route. The discovery made national news. Honeymoon SUV found after 29 years. But for investigators, it was only the beginning. Forensic teams noted the passenger window rolled halfway down, no keys in ignition. The driver's door was open when unearthed, hinge rusted away. One sleeping bag remained in the cargo area. When they lifted the bag, something rattled underneath. A stainless steel thermos with a note sealed inside. The handwriting was cramped but unmistakably Michael's. If anyone finds this, we tried north after the tire blew. Water almost gone. Rachel's dizzy. We can see the ridgeline. We'll walk before sundown. Please tell our families we stayed together. Dated June 5, 1992, 7:42 p.m. The note stopped there, pen dragged sideways as if his hand had slipped. For search teams, the message narrowed the radius. North of the crash site, a labyrinth of gullies led toward an old mining road and a dried spring bed. On March 29th, they followed the coordinates with drones and ground sensors. Nothing but salt crust and rock, until a detection alarm pinged again. At 11:17 a.m., beneath 4 inches of sand, they recovered a small brass compass engraved with Rachel's initials. Its needle spun uncontrollably. They expanded the grid and kept digging until the wind forced them to stop. The temperature hit 112 degrees Celsius before noon. Every team member returned to camp shaken. The desert felt alive, whispering through their radios with static even when switched off. That night, Travis Reed, the man who'd found the rings, couldn't sleep. He sat outside his tent watching the horizon shimmer under moonlight. Around 2 a.m., a faint metallic tone echoed from the detector lying beside him. Though it was powered down, he lifted it, sweeping the air. The sound pulsed once, twice, then faded. He wrote later in his field log, "Same pitch as when I found the rings, coming from north." The next morning he followed that direction alone. Half a mile from camp he found a shallow depression lined with stones that didn't match the local geology. In the center lay a collapsed metal canteen, its surface etched by heat, and beneath it, something glimmering. A second ring, thinner, bent almost flat. He brushed off the dust and saw the engraving, RB. He looked up. On the ridge above, the wind had carved 3 shapes in the sand, 2 side by side, one smaller behind, like the imprint of footprints long erased. He radioed the find. Within hours, a full excavation unit arrived. By sunset, they'd uncovered fragments of bone, fragments only, scattered, bleached, half-fused with rock. DNA would later confirm the remains as Michael and Rachel Bennett. But beneath the stones where Travis had first kneeled, investigators found something else sealed in a film canister wrapped in cloth. A final message, written in blue ink now almost invisible. "We can see the lights. If anyone reads this, tell whoever finds us that love outlasts the heat." It wasn't dated. When they carried the canister to camp, the thermometer read 119 degrees. The ink, though faded, was still wet. The recovered 35mm film canister looked more like a lump of black glass than plastic when technicians received it at the Fresno crime lab. The outer casing had melted into the metal body of the camera, sealed tight by nearly 3 decades of heat and sand. When they pried it open in the clean room, the first strip tore immediately. Emulsion fused, brittle as onion skin. But in the middle of the roll, 7 frames survived. The lab chief, Dr. Mahoney, transferred the images through a slow scan, each frame taking hours to render. The first showed Rachel in a wide sun hat standing beside the Forerunner, the desert stretching behind her. The sky was impossibly bright, the shadows sharp enough to cut. In the corner of the photo, you could see Michael's reflection in the side mirror, holding the camera. The second and third were landscape shots, the kind of photos that never made it to postcards. Barren ridges, empty salt flats. The fourth image changed everything. It was taken from inside the vehicle. The dashboard clock read 5:42 p.m. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, sweating through her shirt. Her mouth was open as if she'd been speaking, but her eyes looked at something outside the windshield. In the distance, dust rose, a faint trail perfectly vertical like smoke. Frame 5 was blurred. The horizon tilted, sand streaking across the lens. Someone had taken it while running. Then the 6th. Michael's arm extended toward the camera, pointing to a ridgeline where 3 metallic shapes glimmered under the sun. The last frame was black except for one bright streak, like lightning frozen in film grain. When the images were enhanced, the lab noticed that in the blurred 5th frame, Rachel's head was turned toward the camera and she appeared to be smiling. The corner of her mouth moved upward even as the rest of the photo shook with motion. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but for the families who gathered at the sheriff's office weeks later, it was the only living proof that, for a few more minutes, they were still themselves. The official report listed cause of death as environmental exposure following vehicle failure. The metallic shapes in frame 6 were dismissed as mirages, reflections off distant rock. The remains were interred in Reno under a single headstone. Together always, 1992. The case might have ended there if not for the storm that hit Death Valley in August 2021. Monsoon rains rolled across the basin, flash floods cutting new channels through rock that hadn't seen water in centuries. When rangers returned to survey the damage, they discovered that parts of the ridge where the Bennetts were found had collapsed into a new gully. From that trench, an off-duty ranger spotted something protruding from a layer of hardened silt, a small brass keyring attached to 2 faded tags. The first tag read Holiday Inn, Barstow. The second, half-worn, had a stamped number, 247. Ranger Hall took a photo, uploaded it to the archive. A week later, a woman from Henderson, Nevada, contacted the Park Service. Her name was Caroline Pratt, and she'd been a desk clerk at the Barstow Holiday Inn in 1992. She recognized the tag immediately. "That's one of ours," she said. "We changed the keys after 1993. Those numbers stopped at 247. The Bennetts had checked in there on June 2nd, the night before they vanished. Hall drove to Barstow to check old records. Most were lost to time, but a single ledger remained. Water damaged, but legible. Room 247, Bennett M&R. Checkout 7:30 a.m. June 3rd, under comments, in faint pencil. Someone had written, "Guest requested early wake-up call, 5:15 a.m. It was routine." Until Hall noticed another name 2 rooms down. Harper Vance. Same checkout time. Same handwriting. Vance had been a field researcher for a geological survey team that summer. Records showed he'd been mapping mineral deposits along the same section of Lippincott Mine Road. No one had ever connected him to the Bennetts. Hall tracked down the survey archives. Vance's last report included a photograph labeled Magnetite Field Anomaly, Site DV47. The coordinates matched within half a mile of the Bennett's crash site. The image was a wide aerial shot of ridges and dunes, and in the corner 3 small bright dots in a perfect line. Hall printed the image and pinned it beside the Bennett photos in his office. It was just data, meaningless, until he noticed something else. When he overlaid the shot onto modern satellite maps, one of the bright points aligned exactly with the location where Travis Reed had found the wedding rings. The next morning, Hall invited Reed back to the park. The hobbyist agreed instantly. He'd never stopped thinking about the rings. Together, they hiked to the site, following the same GPS coordinates. The terrain had changed from the storm. Sand replaced by cracked clay. Where the forerunner had been buried, only a shallow indentation remained. Reed swept his detector once more, half expecting silence. The tone that answered was faint, but distinct. The same metallic chirp he remembered from before. He moved slowly, step by step, until the signal peaked near a jagged boulder. Beneath a thin crust of mud, he uncovered a second thermos, identical to the one that had held Michael's note. Inside was a folded page, ink barely visible. June 6th, camped by rocks. Still together. If anyone finds this, there's something wrong with the compass. It keeps spinning east when we face west. Rachel thinks it's the metal in the hills, but the stars move too. Maybe the valley's playing tricks. We're still trying for the lights. M. Hall read the note twice. "Lights?" he asked. Reed nodded slowly. "He mentioned seeing lights in the last note, right?" "Yeah, but I thought he meant stars." That night they camped at the same ridgeline, recording magnetic readings. Around 10 p.m., the compass needles began to twitch, all pointing the same direction, east, toward the salt basin. Then the detector started pinging at random, as if something buried deep was pulsing beneath them. Reed held up the old wedding rings. The metal vibrated faintly against his palm. He laughed nervously. "You hear that?" Hall did. It was a low hum, almost musical. At dawn, they packed up and left. The desert fell silent again. 2 weeks later, the park received an anonymous email from an encrypted address. Attached was a single photo of the ridge, taken from above. The caption read, "Pattern restored." In the photo, 3 bright points glowed against the valley floor. One where the Forerunner had been, one where the rings were found, one at the ridge where Hall and Reed had camped. All perfectly aligned. Authorities dismissed it as a hoax, but when Hall returned to the site in September, the soil where they'd camped had fused into glass, and the compass in his pocket no longer worked. In the official record, the Bennett file was closed again on October 1st, 2021. The final entry read, "Remains recovered, case concluded." Unofficially, Hall added one last note in pencil. Compass error unresolved. Valley magnetics inconsistent. Possible residual heat signatures recorded 29 years apart. Subjective impression. Same coordinates, same alignment. When he locked the folder, the rings in the evidence bag clinked together, soft, like metal settling after warmth. And for a moment, Hall thought he smelled rain on the air, though the sky outside was cloudless and white. By the summer of 2022, Death Valley was full again. Tourists, film crews, and quietly, the small community of people who chase what they call desert ghosts. They weren't looking for spirits. They were after stories like the Bennetts, unresolved coordinates, patterns that didn't fit. Travis Reed had become something of a name on those forums after the discovery. He never wanted fame, but every few months another interviewer asked him about the rings. It wasn't luck, he'd say. The detector wasn't even on. That line became the headline. But what he meant was simpler. The Valley had chosen to show him something. In August he returned, this time with 2 colleagues, metal detecting specialists Aaron Marsh and Luis Ortega, both former geotechnicians. They planned a full magnetic survey along the ridgelines east of the original crash site. Officially, the Park Service had closed that sector due to unstable terrain, but they carried a permit issued quietly by Ranger Hall himself. The heat was worse than Reed remembered. 117 degrees by noon, sandstorms scouring the horizon like curtains of smoke. The compass spun again, faster this time, then froze, pointing northeast toward an area marked Black Canyon Spur. Aaron's detector pinged twice, loud and irregular. She marked the spot with a red flag. "Iron-rich," she said. "Maybe old mining scrap." But when they dug, there was no metal. Just a pocket of soil blackened and fused, like lightning glass. Beneath it, Luis's shovel struck something solid. They unearthed a slab of melted aluminum folded inward, the shape faintly curved like the hood of a car. The paint still clung in flakes, white, with a ghost of red striping. It wasn't from the Bennett's Forerunner. Theirs had been solid white. Luis wiped it clean, looked up. Different make. Looks older. They measured the coordinates. The slab was found 47 meters north of the Bennett's SUV site, exactly where, in Harper Vance's 1992 photo, the 3rd bright point had been. The Valley wasn't giving up their story. It was extending it. That night, they camped under the ridge. Reed logged every reading, but the numbers were nonsense. Magnetic surges peaking in 15-minute intervals, matching almost exactly the times when the desert wind shifted. Around midnight, Aaron's handheld detector started chirping on its own, the battery removed. "What's that frequency?" she asked. Luis checked his watch. "About 70 beats per minute. Like a heart." They laughed it off, until the sound came again. This time from the direction of the ridge. Reed picked up his recorder. The microphone captured something under the wind. A soft metallic ringing. 2 notes repeating. He turned toward the sound and saw light. Not lightning, not headlights, but a low amber glow bleeding through the sand as if the ground itself were breathing. It pulsed once, twice, then vanished. No one slept. At dawn, they returned to the spot. The sand where the light had come from was warm. Not sun-warm, but body-warm, like metal held too long in a hand. When Reed pressed his palm to it, the detector in his other hand squealed. Aaron took a photo. The timestamp read 6:13 a.m. The image showed the ridge behind them, a wash of pale light, and 3 faint rings in the sand perfectly aligned east to west. They packed up immediately. Luis said he felt dizzy. His watch stopped. By the time they reached Furnace Creek, the digital file had vanished from the camera card. 2 weeks later, the park closed the area permanently. But that same month, the desert shifted again. A violent monsoon tore through the basin, exposing a layer of earth that had been sealed for decades. When the waters receded, rangers found a line of debris stretching half a mile. Tires, rusted tools, a crumpled aircraft fuselage half swallowed by silt. The tail number identified it as a Cessna 210, reported missing in 1972. The coordinates? Within 100 feet of where the Bennett's Forerunner was found. Hall drove out personally. He'd retired by then, but he still carried his old badge. The Cessna's cockpit was intact. Instruments melted into the panel. In the co-pilot's seat was a metal lunchbox sealed tight. Inside, 2 corroded coins and a Polaroid photo. A man and a woman smiling in front of an old Toyota Land Cruiser. The desert behind them the same color as the Bennett's Ridge. On the back, someone had written, June 5th, 1972, for luck. Hall turned the photo over again and again. The handwriting was identical to Michael Bennett's. He took it to a lab. The paper stock was dated 20 years before the Bennetts were even born. The Park Service redacted that detail from all public reports. That fall, when temperatures dropped, Hall met Reed one last time. They stood on the overlook above the valley, dusk bleeding into the canyons. "Do you ever feel like it's not over?" Reed asked. Hall smiled faintly. "Things like this don't end. They just stop being found." He handed Reed a small evidence bag. Inside were the wedding rings. They were supposed to go to the families, but no one wanted them back. "Thought maybe you'd keep them safe." Reed nodded, slid the bag into his pocket. The metal felt warm. That night, back at camp, he placed the rings on a rock beside his tent. The wind had died. For the first time in days, the valley was silent. Then, just before dawn, he woke to the sound. That same metallic tone, distant but clear, pulsing through the sand. He stepped outside. The stars over Death Valley hung low and bright, and across the plain, 3 points of light glowed faintly in the dark, aligning perfectly toward the ridge where the Bennetts had walked. He watched until they faded with the sunrise. In the morning, the rings were gone. Only 2 shallow impressions remained in the dust, side by side, as if someone had lifted them gently and walked away. Reed packed up his tent, leaving his detector behind. When he reached the highway, he looked back once more. The air shimmered, and for an instant he thought he saw 2 figures standing by the ridge, hands clasped, faces turned toward the sun. Then the mirage broke, and the valley was empty again. He drove east, away from the heat. Behind him the wind rose, scattering new patterns across the sand. Later, satellite scans of the basin showed 3 faint metallic signatures forming a line, each at the exact coordinates of the previous discoveries. Ranger Hall's final field note, dated November 3, 2022, read, "The rings weren't lost. They went home. The valley remembers those who stay together." And below that, written in smaller letters, a single line that no one could explain. Pattern complete. Heat constant. M&R, forever, 92.